talk to KWLUG, I told you that milk is a terrible store of value. And now I'm going to talk about Dhall. Yep, I talked about that already. Okay, so I'm talking about Dhall because someone asked me to. So hopefully anyone here wanted to know about it because this was not my idea. But here I am. Dhall is a programming language. So it's interesting because it comes up in this kind of context because it's billed as like a YAML alternative in a lot of ways because that's what Gabriel wants to sell it as. Because it is. But it turns out that the way you can think about it is a lot of things. So it's a purely functional programming language, which if you know what that means, you're like, yay, and if you don't, it doesn't really matter, right? It has types, which is like one of the things it has that most other data formats don't have. So instead of having a schema language that you could use that's a separate thing, like XML has, or like there's a JSON schema language out there that exists, right? It's just built into the system. So you can put schemas on any part of the data or on the whole data structure or whatever, right? And it'll automatically be checked every time you feed it into the interpreter. Yep. This is my favorite thing, is that one of like the biggest feature that we bill about Dhall is something that it isn't.
Improve it.
And this doesn't even mean anything, right? So not Turing complete, all that means is that it isn't Turing complete, but we could be anything, like we could be missing any of the things that would make us complete, right? Like this is always how we say it. Mostly for the purposes of what anyone cares about, what this means is that you can't write infinite loops in Dhall.
So what's the largest integer that you have there?
Hmm?
What's the largest integer?
Oh, we have arbitrarily sized integers. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, don't worry, I'll talk about that. Yeah, so all programs in Dhall technically terminate, which is, you know, a slight improvement over sendmail, where the config file may or may not terminate. Yeah, or overdoing what is really popular these days, where you actually. So my favorite thing. Oh, maybe I'll talk about that, but especially in Ruby on Rails applications, their configuration files. Their configuration files are almost exclusively made of what they pretend is YAML, but it's actually a Ruby-based templating language embedded in a YAML file. So there are 3 programming languages, 2 of which are Turing complete in every Rails configuration file, which is amazing. And they call that the simple version. Yeah, so usually YAML or JSON or ini files or whatever else you like to use for your config files is the sort of thing that Dhall bills itself as wanting to replace. You can use it for a crap ton of stuff that has nothing to do with configuration, but basically everything it's being used for in the wild at this point, like popularly, is for configuration of some kind, often for generating big Kubernetes stacks and stuff like that for IT infrastructure, because when you've got big, complicated, repetitive configuration files, that's what we're good at. Yeah, so Dhall could just be data. So most programming languages can just be data like this, where you just write a data structure. But usually they have to be wrapped in something for it to mean anything. So as far as Dhall is concerned, this is a valid program. And there are several interpreters where you would just feed it this and it'll give you JSON or YAML or whatever you want out. So if you just do that, then it's just an alternate syntax with schemas built in and some other stuff. We have built-in unit testing and stuff now. That just happened. Yeah. But if you want to, you can write basically arbitrarily complex code with some limits. So here I'm importing the map function, and I'm writing a schema for what my users are going to look like, because I guess I'm generating some users. And then I got a list of users I want to generate. It's me and some other guy. And then we just map this function over the list of users to make it so that that every user has the same groups, which is literally the most boring program you could write. But you can see how very quickly, right, if there were 8,000 of these, reducing the boilerplate and the repetitiveness is really like a big part of what this is, right? And then that last program, if I feed it into the interpreter, you're going to get something that looks like this, right? So if you had if you have big long things that are a lot of repetition, then factoring that out, basically Dhall, one way to think about Dhall, which I think I have on one of these slides, is as a templating language. So it's like templates, like forms with pluggable fill-ins, but instead of generating just a blob of text that you hope is valid JSON when you're done, it maintains the structure that you want, so that you're guaranteed to get at least the format that you want. So there you go. So that same file just fed directly into the Dhall YAML, you get the YAML you want out, right? So you can see how a lot of people just use Dhall YAML as their only interpreter, and then they think of it as basically a templating language that produces YAML, which, if that's what you want to do, is totally fine. Like, that's a thing that it does. Yeah, there. See, that's what I just said. Structured templating. So it's, like PHP is unstructured templating, and this is structured templating. And I've never really seen a well-executed structured templating language before, so that's why I showed up here. There are actually a couple other ones sort of floating around now in this space. Like JSONet, I think, is one. But I like this one. Yeah, so here's like a fun, weird example of a thing that is sort of config. So in Ruby on Rails, they have their translations for doing multilingual stuff as YAML files. And then they have this terrible hack where you put something into the YAML which isn't YAML that will hopefully be interpreted by the Rails application as insert data here, so that you can do templating, because you often want to translate things like 6 ducks. But it's not 6 ducks, it's like however many ducks there are, and the application will decide at runtime how many there are, right? So you want to be able to just translate the word ducks and put the 6 in the right place, because different languages will put the number in different places. Yeah, so when you do that with Dhall, because we actually have functions instead of just strings, then instead of writing strings to hopefully end up as functions later, which is what they do by default, you could just write the function that takes the number and prints it out. This is like an interesting case of seeing something that people are trying really hard to do with their existing system and just replacing it with something that already supports that, but without having to import an entire programming language with, infinite loops and I/O and the ability to talk to the network, right? Like you're not running into all that kind of thing, right? So I'm going to talk about safety. This is one of the big things that being like basically the reason that Dhall is purely functional and non-Turing complete is for this, for safety feature stuff. So you have very, very limited access to the world. You can import files and URLs as long as you can just import them so you can get the system to read them for you, and as long as they're valid Dhall code, then they will become part of your program, and if they're not, then you just crash and everything is done. You're over. And that's it. You can't write anything ever. You can't open a port, you can't start a server, you can't write. And so while, for example, a lot of things that just take in a Python script and say, this script is my configuration file, it would be really easy to just stuff an entire web server in the configuration file. That's not really an option here. You can read some environment variables, files, remote things, and you can. Oops! Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. You can put a hash on anything you import, so you can also make sure that the thing you're importing doesn't change in a material way. So this is actually really fun because of the simplicity computationally that Dhall has. the code can actually change and the hash stays the same as long as the behavior of the code is identical. So if someone has like 12 things in a list, and then they later replace it with a loop that produces exactly the same 12 things, the hash doesn't change, which is fun. Yeah.
Does that mean you can't just use a hash command on the file? You have to. It's compressing it in a special way before.
That's right.
It
We have an encoding, though. So you use the command line tools to generate the hash or to just insert the freezes for you. Yeah. So every Dhall program has like a unique binary encoding, which can be used for sending little bits of code on the wire and doing stuff like that, which can be really fun. But we also use that for caching and hashing, so that, yeah, basically for that reason, because you can actually refactor the code, and as long as it's exactly the same behavior, the hash stays the same, which also means that the caching, most clients will cache based on the hash. And so if this URL gets refactored but doesn't change what it does, it won't even have to go out to the network again. It can just look in the cache and say, oh, I already have something by that hash, so I don't really care what he did upstream because it'll do the same thing as what I already have. Yeah, so that's sort of like your double protection. You're not allowed to reach out very much, and when you do reach out, you can make sure that what you're getting is what you thought you were getting back when you wrote the file in the first place, and it's not been replaced by some crazy other thing. Yeah. Basic, normal stuff. We have the same origin policy. So if you fetch, if you do a Dhall import from a HTTP URL, that file can't in turn import like crazy stuff from other URLs, including, you know, this became mostly important because if you're in like an AWS environment, there are all kinds of secret private URLs that you can get to from your box that no one else can get to, but all these fetches are being done from your box, right? So if you imported a file from someone else's server and then their file said to import a file from your secret URL, that would work without this because your local machine has access to the secret URL that they told you to go access. So yeah, so we had to put in same origin policy stuff, that kind of thing. So it's a total language, which is the better thing to say than to say that it's not turn complete. So it always, every program terminates, and every program cannot crash is like a thing you could say. If there's a syntax error or something, obviously the interpreter can't read that. But once the program has started running, once we've actually loaded it successfully, it will always terminate successfully with a value that we can actually use.
Can't you build big data structures that gobble up gigabytes?
Yeah, for sure. So you can definitely still be done on purpose. So this is the Ackermann function. Not very much Dhall code. It definitely will terminate, but probably your computer will like break down into individual atoms long before that happens. We know, like we can prove mathematically that it will terminate, but you're never going to see it end. So it's not going to happen. Yeah, so there are definitely like the benefits of no infinite loops is it's really hard. This is not like an easy function to write. It's really hard to accidentally make your config file hang by just like fat fingering accidental recursive call or a missed counter in a while loop or something like that, right? You're not going to accidentally get yourself into a hanging config file. But if someone wants to maliciously seed you a config file that hangs, like you should definitely still have a timeout on your load because, which most of the libraries do. Like mine does, definitely. I have by default 5-second timeout on all config file loads because this could happen if you were loading untrusted files. Which is a thing we sort of encourage people to be able to do, but you do need a few extra protections in that case because they're definitely, yeah, you could write something that intentionally gobbles all the RAM, or you could write something that intentionally, like this is. So there's actually another thing you can do, which is hilarious. And when people first came up with this, we thought it was a terrible problem, and then Gabriel basically wrote this function and was like, see, you can always be done on purpose, so whatever. So there's another thing you can do where you can import a URL on some server, like example.com/1, and you can have example.com/1 just contain the expression /2, and then /3, right? And if you just write a script that every time it gets requested over HTTP, it generates itself +1, you can just get an infinite chain of imports, which would also be equivalent to this, right? Like that would be an actual infinite situation, technically. Most of the time we get around that by having a depth restriction on imports, but we could fix that in the language, like we could completely ban anything completely infinite like that at the edges, but it's not considered worth the extra work because really you need that extra little layer of a timeout or something anyway because of functions like this. So,
Is this Dhall syntax?
yeah, this is Dhall syntax. Yep. Yeah, you can. I could run it, but there's no point. You would see nothing happen.
I mean, with what editor, for example, you do that arrow?
Oh yeah. Well, if you look back at my other examples back here, you just type this usually. Usually you just type like / and arrow like this because you don't want to bother. But if you want it to be fancy and type a lambda and an arrow, that also works. And if you feed the normal thing that you type into the formatter tool, it'll produce this by default. If you don't like it, there's a way to turn that off, but you know, it just looks fancy, so the formatter produces it. This code happens to have been run through the formatter.
So the / in the original file is function?
Yeah, you just
function?
type. It's you type / normally to get a function, but you can also put the lambda character in if you have a keyboard with 8 million buttons on it or something. Could be fun. Yep. Couple other nice things to talk about. We have multi-line strings, so automatically you can see text templating. Traditional text templating can easily be recovered in Dhall. You can go back and just write a Dhall file that's just a function that takes in like the arguments you want, the things you want plugged into the template, and then a giant multi-line string and put your stuff in and.
Will that use a leading space or no?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, you can indent these. Basically, what we do is we look at the beginning and ending markers, and we trim all space that they have. They have to be at the same level. So you can indent inside here, so you could put code blocks inside, and that indentation would be preserved, but all leading indentation is not preserved, so that you can embed your strings in arbitrarily complex structures, and it'll still work out. Yeah.
Cool.
And when I came to the party, that only worked if you were using spaces, and I was like, fuck you guys. So now tabs work. Yeah. Yeah, we have optionals, right? Basic things to, if you have a value, what you want to be able to say that sometimes it's not there, then you can do that by just saying none, and then you have to wrap all your other values in a sum. Fun thing, we have enums, which are fun, right? If you want to type red, green, blue instead of hex codes or whatever, that's a terrible example, but it's the one everyone uses for enums for some reason, so there it is. I wrote it again. Yeah, I mean, obviously, variables are like the most important basic thing that we have that I didn't even talk about, but yeah. So that's the slides that I ran through, but I can type tons of things in a terminal and show off stuff if people want. Where am I on my tab? I'm halfway in. That's about right.
Can I get that QR code?
You can get that QR code. Yeah. So if you for some reason want to see any of those slides again, I could just show them to you again, or you can go to that link and I will show you the slides again. And all the links in the presentation are clickable, which is the main reason you might want to do that if you cared at all about that kind of thing. Okay. Let's show off something. I don't know what. Okay. So this is the part where everything goes to shit because I'm demoing now instead of hitting next. Okay. So right, basic. I just finished saying basic text templating. Getting that back is super easy. So if we want to pretend that we're just text templating language and we don't have any of our fancy other features, then we can just do this, right? So first we make sure that we didn't make any syntax errors. Nope, I didn't. Okay. So now we can do this. Oh boy, not using RC on my server. Okay. Right. So I can really, so this is my favorite thing ever. Because imports in Dhall are just like, you just write the file name or the URL, then when I write this file that is a function, to call the function, I can just do that straight here on the command line by saying like, file, okay, now that file will be replaced by the function, and then I just put the arguments in that I want, which is super fun. And yeah, so Dhall text just gives me this, or I can, you know, do that if you would have wanted that, but this is a terrible example for Dhall.json, right? So yeah, so if I just want text templating, I can always get back to that really easily. And of course we have all our I don't know why this is a, yeah. Look, I can add things. The best demo ever. Yay, adding works. Hooray. See, it's so good.
Yeah, you mentioned you kind of encourage sourcing untrusted things. Can you contain, like, so if I wanted to, say, get the name of a certain thing and I wanted that to go in a certain part of my configuration, can I do that? Like, say a part of my configuration or, I don't know, Kubernetes or container is just to put in something not critical, like not setting like the access levels to containers.
Right.
But I don't want this other section to break out and do something that is sensitive. So do I have to worry if I'm going to source something, or is there a safe way to modify some part of my template in a way that can't break out and modify other parts?
Sure. So here, like, untrusted, I'll make an untrusted file, which will for now contain the number 6. But it could have anything in it. It could be any program, right? And I'll come in here, and I'll say, that I want to get, I want to add one to that instead, right? So if I do this now, it does what you would expect, right? Yeah. And now this is now, like, this can't be, for one thing, I can't do this, right? Because that'll just not work. Right, it'll be like, no, it's not a number, right? Because we have types and schemas and stuff. We can't do that. So basically, I can write any Dhall program that will produce a number, but it can't do anything else. Like, it can.
There's no way it could modify another part of that string.
No, it can't do anything except produce a number. If it does anything but produce a number, then the program won't run because it'll be a type error.
How did we type? So can you show me how we typed it? I don't know.
So like if I put anything in here that's not a number, right? Then when I try and run it, it's just gonna be a type error because.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Because I'm using it as a number.
Okay.
Can you explicitly say that the Dhall thing, the untrusted, should be a number?
If
you don't add one.
Yeah. Well, I don't have to add one because I'm also using natural show here. But yeah, if I want to be like really picky, I can do this. Say like, yeah, it's definitely a number.
What if it was dangerous for it to be a negative number? Or it to be 0? Can I put restrictions on it somehow?
So naturals can only be 0 or positive, and integers can be negative.
Okay.
So that's there. For if it's dangerous for it to be 0, you would have to use an if, which we do have if. So you could do like, if it's 0, then you can't error, but you could make it be some other default value or something, right?
Okay. Can you use something like a ternary, or you have to use a for it?
Well, our ifs are ternary, basically.
Okay.
So I'll just write it live, and then it'll be terrible. So I'm gonna do. I'm pretty sure this is.
It's a string right now, though, right?
Huh?
Is it still a string? Untrusted.
No, it's a number. It always has to be a number.
Oh, I mean, what's it actually right now?
But what is it actually?
I think it might have failed because it was a string.
No, it's actually a number. Equals. That syntax doesn't. Fuck. Doing this live is not a good idea. I forget. We added that recently. Equality on numbers. Is it this? I don't remember. No, I think you have to do like. Oh yes. Oh, actually, I'll just do this because of the particular case we're doing. Because we have an is0 function, and then I don't have to.
Oh,
remember.
okay. But it's still not. What's in untrusted right now?
Oh, right. Now
That's
I'm
what I was
returning a
thinking.
number, so I have to do this. No, I'm just natural show it here. What the fuck?
File untrusted to Dhall is the wrong function.
Yeah, I think it's
Oh,
still
right,
high.
yeah, you're
That's
right.
what I've been saying for a bit.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're absolutely right. I left this wrong because that was the whole demo that I was doing before. Yeah, you're right. There.
Cool. And now if we make it 0, it
And
should
now
be
if
1.
I make it 0, it should be 1.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so, so yeah, so if you need extra restrictions that we can't do in the type system, you can always do something like this. If there's no default that you would want to replace with instead, and you instead basically want it to fail, what you would want to do is have the whole template return an optional, right? And then you would have to bubble that up so that the whole thing becomes either the actual config or no config.
Well, can I do
Something
it?
like
Can
that.
you do an if under untrusted and just return nothing there?
Yeah, like I could do that, but you would have to bubble it up somehow to represent that failure at a time
Okay.
level. It's not terribly hard to do, but you would have to, because you can't ever just fail. You have to return some, right, that's the whole thing. You have to return some value, but the value can just be the value none, and then other things will check for that and do the right thing. So it is possible to do that. Yeah, so your untrusted one here, right, it can do things. It can read files, because if it's on the local file system where you get it from, which it doesn't have to be, but if it is, then it can read local files. But like, it depends what you mean by read, right? Because your
What about
program.
the same origin policy.
Yeah. So if you're getting them from a remote server, if that's where you get the untrusted stuff from, then it can't read local files at all, of course, because that would be crazy. Because how would that even work, right? They would have to tell you, like even not for security reasons, just for practicality reasons. If remote things could import from locals, then they would have to have documentation telling you to create that local before you import the remote, or nothing would work, which is an insane situation. to
They
be
could
in.
try. I mean, you could try to source etc shadow or something. I don't know what you could do. You can't.
Well, so the main thing is, even if it was a local file, which can import from local, it's your program doing the import. Like they're only running in your context.
Yes.
So all they could do is they could make some file on your system appear in your config, which is not like they can't leak the data to
Well, that could be
themselves.
if for some reason that was going onto a public. If they could do that, and you were using this to make some file that's hosted on a file server,
Yeah.
then they could maybe leak your whole Etsy.
For sure. If you
Shadow.
were absolutely, if you were using this to produce a file that you were going to then show publicly, you would definitely not want to run the untrusted stuff from a local file.
Right.
You would want to, in some way, instruct the interpreter to have it be less trusted than that. The easiest way being that if you import from HTTP, then we do same origin and it won't work. Or depending on the interpreter you're using, like different language bindings, like my Ruby language bindings have a lot of options you can set to just say like this import do like, you know, you can do stuff like that. But yeah, if you're sourcing from a local file, the assumption is that local files have access to the system they're on and remote files don't. That's
Will it do anything with course headers? Like, can you?
yes, we support course headers.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you can say on your server that you do allow another server.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. We support the course headers and that kind of thing. Yeah. Oh yeah. Because you can also, yeah. So like, if there's stuff you're worried about, untrusted can definitely do like crazy stuff, right? Now I don't want this to be a number at all. Right. That's stuff you can do. But like, it just depends on what you're using it for, right? If you're using it as a config for internal purposes, this could be something you want, right? You could want it to be that your users can specify to use some internal piece for yourself, right? That could be totally reasonable. But if you're using it to generate a file you're showing people, then obviously that would be less ideal. So
What was that? What's an untrusted right now? So if you use HTTP, can it use that? Like, could that be served by a web server?
No.
Okay.
No, a web server can't read an environment variable for the same reasons, because then they would have to tell you for like the same.
Well, it's
security
still running
reasons
on your
and
machine.
others. Yeah, but the interpreter just won't let it.
Okay.
Because the interpreter knows if it's sourcing from a remote. Actually, I'm on a web server here, so let's do this. Right, we'll just do the same thing. And then we will import from that. And it says, yeah. Because your import is trying to import from something local, but it's a remote import, so it's just not allowed to do that.
If for some reason you did want to do that, is there a way to allow it, or no?
In a shell script wrapper, download the file first and then import it from local.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you could have the remote thing be a function that takes an input.
That's right.
And then I call it with a function.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can totally do that. No problem. Right? Of course, this is the worst possible example of that, but I'm going fast. Right, and then here I can say right, and then that will be a white space error or something. Oh, yeah. I know how this language works. It's fine. I know my own syntax. There.
Awesome.
So that is, yes, for sure, a way that you can do that kind of thing. Yeah, and then if you want to do, you know, more complicated structures, right, then every mode is gonna, so if you're running just the Dhall mode, right, you always get Dhall code back out, but we've been running in the text mode, but now we're making a list, so it's just gonna be like, no, can't do that. But, of course, I can do this, make it JSON, make it YAML, make it YAML again, because we have two different YAML interpreters right now, good time, they do slightly different things. Yeah, I can also,
Is there YAML to Dhall as well?
there is a YAML to Dhall. Yep. You have to give it a type because it doesn't know otherwise. But okay, so let's make a YAML file.
Well, you have that Dhall to YAML just produced file.
Hmm?
Feed it back in.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Let's do it. Okay, so we've got Dhall to YAML. I'm going to YAML to Dhall. but it wants a schema here. So that's fine. We'll say Dhall type t.Dhall because that's the thing we, right? So that's our schema. No, it's not, because we're feeding in an argument. Our schema's just this. Okay, so now come on. Oh, variable. What the crap? Do I need this? Yeah, there we go. There, I get the same the same code back. So yeah, you can do that. I have in my I have a crazy thing in the Dhall gem. That can. Oh, I also have a YAML to Dhall that doesn't need a schema, and it just tries to guess. And they didn't want that in the official tool because they didn't like all the guessing I was doing. But for this example, it should be really easy. Oh boy! Oh right. My tool doesn't produce the text format; it produces the binary format. But I can get the text back this way. There. See? No schema required. I'm just gonna do it like this. Great. Which also means that I can do. I have my. It's just that there are crazy cases, right? So I have some JSON, and I want to make it into Dhall, right? Like some simple cases are simple, right? The list of numbers, right? But then like, what if I do this? Right, so that works. That's probably what I wanted. And what if I do this? Like, that's almost definitely not what you specifically meant, right? I just invented an enum out of thin air and stuffed it in the Dhall code, because that's what, you would have to do something like this, right, to make it work. The point is to make it so that you can always, right, you get back what you started with, sort of, as a weird exception in this case, because my tool and their tool are not thinking the same way. But, yeah, so there's a reason they didn't want to, because it can get really, really fun. Like, what if I do this, right? Oh no. Oh, right. No, that's because my JSON's not valid. There we go. Anyway, so the official tool requires a schema just because otherwise you have to do crazy inference stuff, which I'm doing in mine, but it may or may not be useful. I'm just doing it. I'm partly doing it because I want to be able to take arbitrary Ruby code and have it call Dhall functions as though they're Ruby functions, which I use in the XML tool so that I can render XML by having the Dhall function just use no-kokiri commands as though they were part of Dhall from the outside, and then it just like folds over its own tree and I get an XML tree out, which is super fun.
Is there a Dhall library for Ruby, or do you not?
Yeah, I maintain the Dhall library for Ruby. Yeah. And for Rails. I also have a Rails one that does some extra things. This is like my Rails one. I maintain the Rails one, I maintain the Ruby one, so it has like all kinds of fun stuff. So I have it installed right here.
Is it just shell out, or is it like a...
No, it's an entire separate implementation. Yeah, so I can... Right. All the same stuff works. But then if I want to like, well, say this function, right? I load it up and I get a function, and then I can call it with a Ruby string. But I can also call it with a Ruby number, because Ruby doesn't have types. So the boundary between the Ruby's untyped system and the Dhall type system is a little bit fun for me to like decide what to do with sometimes. But yeah, so what's fun about this is it means that you're I showed this a little bit with the Rails translation tools, is that your config files can actually contain functions that don't have the parameters passed into them yet, so that when your program loads them, you can actually call the same config file with different parameters in different contexts, which can produce some very interesting, useful results.
Any other languages?
Other than Ruby, yeah, so official bindings that we consider done right now. So the only ones on here that are really bindings are Haskell and Ruby. The Rust ones just announced that they're considering themselves done. They just haven't made it on the list yet. Oh no, the Clojure ones are on this list too. Yeah. So Clojure, Haskell, Ruby. Clojure basically gets you the entire JVM if you're willing to write some glue code, so any Java thing. And then Rust are all, and then we have like YAML, JSON, XML, Kubernetes, translators. There's a Nix translator, and then there's, yeah.
How heavy are the Rust bindings? I mean, Rust looks a bit like C++, right? So do you use this as a library or not?
Yeah. Yeah. You mean like uses a library outside of Rust?
I'm thinking about languages like C. If I want to use it from C, that's sometimes impossible. And then calling, I don't know, Haskell from C or Ruby from C is a bit weird to do. But calling Rust. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Calling. I haven't worked with the Rust bindings a lot yet because they only just announced last week that they're considering themselves feature complete enough to go in the list. But for sure, I think he has a goal of almost replacing the rest of us, right? Because also I could just replace my Ruby bindings with a little bit of glue code that calls Rust, technically. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not done or even actively working because I have a new baby in my house, but I'm sort of working on a Haxa binding, which would give me native C++ bindings and PHP bindings and like all kinds of stuff.
That would be cool. Is that available somewhere for looking at? Or is it
Well, it's not done enough to use at all. I wrote, all it does right now is parse the code and be like, parse 6x, which turns out to be at least 30% of the work, but it's definitely not usable. Although I might have it up somewhere still, even. Actually, I think I do. I think it's here, if you, for some reason, really wanted to look at it. I'm pretty sure, yeah, right here. Here it is. See, I'm going to get Python, PHP, C#, Java, C++, and other things that no one cares about. Yep. It can even compile in PHP 5 compatible mode or PHP 7 compatible mode for reasons, because Haxa is kind of cool.
Does it also support JavaScript? I thought it did.
Yes, but you're right. I think I was skipping JavaScript at the time because someone else was working on a binding, but then that hasn't actually happened, so I could go back and try. There's some tweaking you have to do, especially with the parser. That's super fun. This is like way off on a whatever.
Is there a standard test suite they use to test against? Or?
Yes. Yeah, we have an official the link from here to our thing. The official language. We have a spec and a test suite, and the test suite is considered like. Strictly speaking, if you pass the tests but don't apply to the spec, then you're still wrong. But we consider any place where the tests and the spec diverge a bug. And I would say that most of the reason I ended up involved is because this project, like the language project, is one of the best governed, easiest to get into free software projects on the planet. Because you just show up and any not insane thing you want to add, probably someone like people will give you the time of day about, and the decision on whether or not something goes in is just a majority vote amongst all the current binding maintainers, of which there were 3. There are now 4. So the fact, which is even better, because like Gabriel made this whole language up, and then he intentionally wrote the rules so that now that there are 4 of us, we could put things in that he doesn't want. As long as the Rust guy and I and the Clojure guy all agree, then even if Gabriel hates it, it goes into the language, which is fun. We haven't done that yet, but I hope we don't have to, because he's pretty cool. But it would be fun. It's fun that it's allowed. Oh no. What did I just click? Oh, never mind, it's good. Okay, anyway. Yeah, so there's like a very big test suite. When I wrote my bindings, I added like several hundred tests at the time, and there have been more since then, but yeah. Basically what I do these days when I want to upgrade to a new version of when I want to upgrade my binding to a new version of the language, is I just pull the latest version of the tests, and then I just run them until I pass, and then I go like, probably good, and then I push that version. That's what I usually do.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, actually, I have a script that I use, git bisect, on the tests, because they're also in a Git repo, so that instead of looking for a bug in my code, because my code doesn't have a bug, it's working just on an old version, I look for the first instance of a test that fails, because sometimes they'll add new tests, and I just magically already passed them because I already had that feature or whatever, or they're just new tests for something that already was supposed to happen. And then it'll just show me only the tests that I actually have to change my implementation for, and then I just like pass each one of those, and then I can put it on a new release. It's super fun. I like doing that. Anyway, yeah. So it's a really nice project to work with. It's a very friendly community, and you don't have to actually, because we're working on a language in abstract in this repo, you don't have to like know any stack. Like when I showed up, the only mature bindings were in Haskell, but you didn't have to know any Haskell to work on the language, because you're just working on the spec and the tests, all of which are in Dhall itself or in English. So, yeah, so that's fun. And then writing your own bindings, it's like, when I did it, it was basically, you have to get a parser working. I managed to get an auto-generated parser working, which is super nice, because I don't have to tweak my parser most of the time. It just pulls, because the spec has a grammar in it that's machine readable. So I just figured out how to make that into a thing. And then it's just like grinding, basically. It's all simple stuff, but it's just like, if it's addition, then add it. If it's equality, fucking check for equality. Like, it's just like grinding for a week. And then you have an implementation.
You call it a binding, but isn't it just another implementation? Or
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you think, how you think about it. Like, it's basically the equivalent of like a JSON library for your language. It's a Dhall library for your language. But it's also kind of like a language binding, because what you're importing is a programming language. So, I don't know. You can think about it either way.
you're binding to the language itself.
Yeah, like there's a Go binding that we don't put in the list, because all it does is exec Dhall to JSON and then parse the JSON. So we don't list it as an official binding, because like it works and it's fine. And if you want to use Dhall from Go, it will work 80% of the time. But if you want to have functions in your code that you call from Go, we can't do that, right? Because we can't convert those into JSON. Yeah.
Did you ever had, for governance, a split decision situation?
No, only because none of us are an asshole. Like, there have been a couple times where I have wanted to vote no, and I just vote abstain instead because the other two guys voted yes, and there's no reason to like make a big fuss about it. And it's one of those things where the language is in flux enough. Like, if you pick a version and just stick with it, it's pretty stable. And I think from a user's point of view, it's actually probably pretty stable generally. But we do release a major version with breaking changes at least once every 2 or 3 months. So it's pretty unstable from a binding maintainer's point of view, where there's like constantly new things flowing into the standard. But most of them are like incremental additions that won't break existing code. So usually people don't. A lot of our users don't consider it too thrashy, but for me, maintaining the Ruby libraries, I'm like, every 2 or 3 months I have to do something, or my version just doesn't read the code anymore. which
That
is
means that then you have the usual problems of a software ecosystem, where you call a library which calls another library, I mean the import URL stuff, and the version numbers all need to align magically to make things work.
well, that's part of why we have the hashes. So if you
Oh yeah, that means that it's guaranteed to work.
Right.
But how do you find the common version that works for everything, right? This requires at least version 9, this requires at most version 7, and everything like that. Is this a problem already, or is that
I think it's
still small enough?
I think the ecosystem is small enough that it hasn't been a big problem yet.
Okay.
And I think by the time we get a larger ecosystem, we will have more voices actively trying to reduce the speed at which breaking changes get launched. Gabriel's current methodology is that the trains should just run on time, so he'll like, he won't even hold a release for a breaking change. If he knows another breaking change is coming, but it's release time, he'll just release now and then release again later with another breaking change. Like, it's fine. Because he would rather get features to users faster because it gets us more feedback faster, which is kind of useful at the stage that we're at. And if people really don't want it, they can just not upgrade. It's not really a big deal. But yeah, I feel like with just him, that was fine. When we got to 3 language binding authors, like the closure guy is constantly 2 or 3 versions behind. I'm currently 1 version behind, but in another few days I will probably be 2 versions behind. And with the Rust guy coming on board, like I feel like we're going to start having pressure from all the maintainers to be like, hey, maybe slow down because we're not keeping up with your changes. But it's partly because of how welcoming the community is. Like, most of those breaking changes aren't Gabriel making up new shit. Like, as far as he's concerned, the language is fine. It's other people coming in being like, wait, trailing commas need to work. Oh, right. So we make trailing commas work, but then technically that's a fundamental change to the parser that we all have to go do now, right? Yeah, so it's fun. I feel like the feedback we get is that it's not a big deal anymore for most users, the changes, because we try and make it so that existing code almost always keeps working. But it's usually feature additions, but there are small changes that happen. Like we removed an entire syntax in October because it had been replaced by a newer one, but that was like a deprecation thing where it was like deprecated for a whole year and then it eventually got removed, that kind of thing. So usually things that are going to really break old code, there's a pretty big window, or not big by Debian standards, but big by the standards of a project that releases every 3 months. Yeah, we're probably trending in a stable direction, partly because of the fact that we have all these sysadmins as our users. And they don't really want to change things all the time. But I don't know. I only get 1 vote. I don't get to decide.
But can you give some examples of how people are using it?
I can show you a thing I'm doing with it. Whoa, what's that? Ugh. I was going to show this anyway at some point, I think I thought I was going to anyway. Is the one in here any good? Probably not. Let's find out. Yeah. So I generate all my, so this is an app that I build for, I run my tests on Debian and I build an F-Droid version and I run tests for Windows and I run, lots of stuff. So this is the generator script to generate all of my, so it's like a continuous integration system that takes its config in YAML, but I write all my configs in Dhall. So I just have a trivial shell script that just like converts everything into YAML for me that I just run before I push. And then you can see a lot of them are, I can do this. I can say like, oh, I want the Debian one, but I'm going to use stable. I want the Debian one, but I'm going to use testing. And when I'm in testing, I need these extra packages, right? And I'm going to use the Debian one in unstable, and I need these extra packages. And then like, even the Ubuntu, then I want the Ubuntu one with latest, right? So I can do that, and then if I go into my lib, right, my Debian one, even it's just like, oh, I'm going to use a Debian-based system that is Debian at some release. And then I actually, at the bottom, have this one thing that actually builds like the recipe for the continuous integration for a single version that just knows about packages that I need on every Debian style system, what my Git source is, like the basic commands to actually do my build. And then I can reuse that in Ubuntu, right, and say it's Ubuntu / whatever. So I get, so this is like, I could write all this stuff in YAML, but it would be like 12 files that were all almost completely the same text. So I can use this to really, and this is in a small project. Like you can imagine in a bigger project with more variants, this gets pretty nice pretty fast.
Could it go into a single file if you don't like having 12 files by defining functions and so on?
Yeah,
And
a little
calling the
bit.
Functions and
A little bit. I want, yeah, this structure is mostly partly because of how I wanted it structured. Like I wanted one top-level Dhall file for each top-level YAML file that I end
oh,
up
these are the
generating.
entry points then.
These are the entry
Oh,
points.
sorry. No, that's a good. Yeah.
Yeah, so here, each one of these is an entry point, and it's like a one-liner, but these are all the entry points. And then the gen script basically just loops over the entry points and generates YAML from them. And then the actual, like each of these is, yeah, these are the only actual thing, like reusable parts. And here, yeah, my Debian and Ubuntu files are both themselves kind of trivial wrappers around Debuild. Do they have to be separate files? No, they could have been done as a single file with a function that takes like a enum or something to switch between the two options. Like I could have done it that way. I just did it this way instead. But yeah. Yep, so that's an example of something I'm doing with it that's at least complicated enough to be somewhat interesting. Yeah, I get the sense that a lot of the, like there's actually a whole Kubernetes library to do like schemas and stuff for Kubernetes deploys, and I get the feeling that there's a lot of people doing that. There's also this crazy company, I forget what they're called, that's using a slightly extended version of Dhall as a general purpose programming language so that they can allow third parties to write code plugins that run inside their system. Because they like all of our safety guarantees and stuff. And they've just like extended that a little bit.
Okay.
And then, yeah, and then they've just added some more, but most of what they've added is more operations, because we have a lot of things like strings are mostly opaque. Like there's no way to do string processing in Dhall right now, because it's generally believed that if you need that, you should do it in the host and not inside the config file. Because you could just use a more expressive data structure in the config file in the first place, right? That eventually becomes a string instead of starting with a string. Because we're not limited to that. But for their purposes, because they're running arbitrary subroutines that people are sending them over the wire, then they want string manipulation. So they added a few primitives for that, stuff like that, which is not that hard to do. Yeah, so that's another thing that's being done with it that's more crazy. Yeah. Maybe let's pull it. Okay. Sounds good.